The night of February 14, 2025, draped Gulfport, Florida, in a humid stillness that pressed against the skin like a damp cloth, muting the cicada's restless drone into a faint, throbbing pulse. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, take a moment to comment below where you're watching from, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification button so you never miss another gripping unknown crime story. The small coastal town slumbered under a sky pricked with stars, its streets lined with weathered bungalows and sagging palms, their fronds whispering in the occasional breeze. Streetlights cast feeble pools of yellow across cracked sidewalks, flickering like tired sentinels over a place that felt both intimate and forgotten. Inside one such home, a two-story relic of faded pastel paint, 16-year-old Miranda Corset sat cross-legged on her bed, cocooned in a world of her own making. The room was a cluttered sanctuary, posters of pop stars curling at the edges, a desk buried under textbooks she hadn't cracked in weeks, a chipped mirror reflecting her restless hazel eyes and the tangle of her dark hair. Her smartphone glowed in her hands, its light carving shadows across her face as she scrolled through a social media app, a dating platform she'd slipped onto despite the age warnings, drawn by the thrill of the forbidden. Her fingers hesitated over a flirty message to Steve 35, a username that promised mystery and escape from the monotony of Gulfport. Downstairs, her grandmother's voice drifted up through the creaking floorboards, frail and worn from years of solitary caregiving. "Miranda, lights out soon. School tomorrow," it called, a plea tinged with exasperation. Miranda smirked, her lips curling as she hit send, the message darting into the digital void. She flopped back against her pillows, staring at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars had faded to ghosts, unaware of the thread she'd just cast into a shadowed abyss. 30 miles north, in the gritty sprawl of St. Petersburg, Stephen Gress slouched against the warped railing of a duplex porch at 2708 27th Avenue North. At 35, he was a lean, sinewy figure, all sharp angles and unshaven stubble, his grin a jagged slash that cut through the dimness like a blade. The night clung to him, humid and heavy, the faint tang of cigarette smoke curling from the butt pinched between his fingers. The duplex behind him sagged under years of neglect, peeling paint, cracked windows patched with duct tape, a rusted screen door creaking on its hinges. His phone buzzed in the pocket of his faded jeans, and he fished it out with a grunt, squinting at Miranda's message through the haze of smoke. A low, guttural chuckle rumbled in his throat as he exhaled a plume into the air, muttering gotcha to the empty street, his voice a rasp that blended with the distant hum of traffic. He tapped out a reply, his thumbs deliberate, each word a lure cast into the night. Inside, Michelle Brandes sprawled across a threadbare couch, her 37 years etched into the lines around her mouth and the hardness in her hazel eyes, dulled by too many late nights and too few regrets. The TV blared a late-night infomercial, some pitch for a miracle cleaner, its garish light flickering across her face as she chain-smoked, ash dusting the scarred coffee table. A half-empty bottle of cheap vodka sat within reach, its cap long lost. She didn't look up as Stephen pocketed his phone, her attention fixed on the screen, though her mind drifted elsewhere, somewhere bitter and distant. He stood in the doorway watching her for a moment, his thoughts spinning a web she'd soon stumble into, whether she willed it or not. By midday on Valentine's Day, the sun hung high over St. Petersburg, its heat baking the asphalt and glinting off the duplex's grimy windows, lending the place a tired, hollow sheen. Miranda arrived on foot, her sneakers scuffing the cracked concrete, her backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. She told her grandmother she was meeting a friend from school, a lie that slipped out as easily as breath. Her thrift store jacket hung loose on her frame, her ponytail swaying as she approached the porch where Stephen waited. He greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, all teeth and practiced charm, ushering her inside with a casual wave. "Hey kid, good to see ya," he said, his voice syrupy with a warmth that felt rehearsed, a predator's purr masked as friendliness. The air inside hit her like a wall, stale, thick with cigarette smoke and the faint sourness of spilled beer. Michelle glanced up from the couch, her gaze narrowing as it swept over Miranda, taking in the messy hair, the nervous energy, the faint flush of excitement on her cheeks. "Who's this?" she asked, her tone flat, the cigarette dangling from her lips shedding ash onto her lap. "Just a friend," Stephen replied, brushing it off with a flick of his hand. "Chill, babe." Miranda shifted her weight, clutching her phone like a lifeline, her heart thudding with a cocktail of thrill and unease she couldn't name. The living room was a chaos of clutter, empty cans, a stained rug, a TV stand tilting under the weight of old DVDs, and the windows were shrouded with heavy curtains trapping the daylight outside. She hovered near the doorway, unsure whether to sit or flee, but Steven's easy grin pulled her in, a gravitational force she didn't yet recognize as dangerous. That afternoon bled into evening, and Miranda stayed, her laughter mingling with Steven's dumb jokes as they sprawled on the living room floor, a greasy pizza box open between them. The duplex felt like a bubble, its walls sealing them off from the world beyond, where Gulfport's quiet streets and her grandmother's worried calls faded to a distant hum. Michelle thawed over the hours, her initial suspicions softening as she tossed Miranda a soda from the fridge with a grunt, her reluctance giving way to a grudging acceptance. "You're all right, kid," she muttered, lighting another cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating the weariness in her face. The trio formed a strange, fragile bond, Miranda's wide-eyed trust brushing against the jagged edges of two adults who'd long since traded their morals for survival. Steven spun tales of bar fights and petty scams, his voice a drawl that made the mundane sound thrilling, while Michelle offered dry, sarcastic asides, her laughter rare but sharp when it came. For Miranda, it was an escape, a crack in the shell of her small-town life, a taste of something raw and unfiltered. She snapped selfies with them, her phone flashing in the dimness, oblivious to the shadows creeping closer. Outside, the St. Petersburg night pressed against the windows, a humid curtain that muffled the distant wail of sirens and the rustle of palms, leaving them cocooned in a space where time seemed to dissolve. Days stretched into a hazy blur, Miranda slipping deeper into the duplex orbit. She texted her grandmother vague excuses, sleepovers, study groups, each lie a thread unraveling her old life. By February 20th, the air inside had turned sour, thick with a tension that prickled the skin and set nerves on edge. The kitchen was a mess, dishes piled in the sink, their edges crusted with dried food, the counter littered with empty beer cans and cigarette butts, the faint hum of the TV a constant drone from the next room. Miranda paced the cramped space, her brightness dimmed by a gnawing unease that had crept in over the days, a feeling she couldn't shake. Her jacket hung over a chair, her backpack slumped in a corner, signs of a stay that had stretched too long. Steven loomed in the doorway, his eyes dark and accusing, his voice rising over a petty grievance that had festered into rage. A missing necklace, Michelle's cheap silver trinket that had vanished from the coffee table. "You think you can just take shit? Huh?" he snarled, stepping closer, his shadow swallowing the flickering light from a bare bulb overhead. "I didn't touch anything. I swear." Miranda shot back, her voice trembling as she backed against the counter, her hands raised in a futile shield. Michelle emerged from the living room, her cigarette glowing like a tiny ember in the gloom, and grabbed Miranda's arm, her grip cold and unyielding. "You're lying," she hissed, her face a mask of suspicion, her breath sour with vodka and smoke. The room held its breath, the three of them locked in a tableau of mistrust, the air crackling with the weight of what was to come. Then chaos erupted. Steven lunged, shoving Miranda against the wall with a force that knocked the air from her lungs, her scream piercing the air, sharp, fleeting, a cry swallowed by the duplex peeling walls. Michelle pinned her arms, her hesitation dissolving into complicity as Steven's fists fell, a brutal rhythm that echoed in the tight space. Miranda flailed, her sneakers slipping on the linoleum, her pleas choking into gasps. Steven snatched a plastic bag from the counter, a grocery sack, its edges crinkled, and yanked it over her head, tightening it with a sickening rustle. Her struggles weakened, her body thrashing then stilling, her final breath a faint shudder against the plastic. She crumpled to the floor, a lifeless heap amid the clutter, her phone skittering across the tiles to rest against a chair leg, its screen dark. Steven stood over her, panting, sweat beading on his forehead as he wiped his hands on his jeans, his chest heaving with the exertion of murder. Michelle stumbled back, lighting another cigarette with shaking fingers, the flame trembling as it caught the tip. "What the hell did we do?" she whispered, her voice a hollow rasp, smoke curling around her words like a shroud. "We clean it up," Steven snapped, his tone clipped and final, his eyes darting to the body as if it were a problem to be solved, not a girl they just extinguished. The night swallowed their next moves as Steven dragged Miranda's body across the floor, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the tiles, a sound that gnawed at the silence. Michelle watched from the porch, her silhouette framed by the flickering streetlight, her eyes hollow as he heaved the girl into the backseat of his beat-up sedan, an old Ford with chipped paint and a dented fender. The engine sputtered to life, a guttural growl that shattered the stillness, and he drove into the darkness, the taillights fading down the street like dying embers. Michelle lingered outside, the cigarette burning down to her fingers, the sting of it grounding her as the weight of what they'd done settled into her bones. She flicked the butt into the yard, its glow snuffed out in the damp grass and turned back inside, the duplex walls closing around her like a cage. In Largo, at 12243 Mallory Drive, the house owned by Michelle's mother stood silent under a moonless sky, its windows dark and unseeing, its clapboard siding weathered by years of salt air. Stephen pulled into the driveway, the sedan's headlights cutting through the night, their beams catching the glint of a rusted mailbox tilting on its post. He hauled Miranda's body inside, the door creaking shut behind him, sealing him in a space that smelled of dust and neglect. The furniture was draped in faded cloths, the air musty with disuse, a mausoleum for a crime yet to be uncovered. He worked alone, the whine of a saw breaking the stillness, its mechanical growl echoing through the empty rooms, a sound that vibrated in the walls as blood pooled on the hardwood. He dismembered her with a methodical calm, his movements precise, almost surgical, as if he were assembling a puzzle in reverse. The blade bit through flesh and bone, staining the rags he'd strewn around, the coppery tang of blood mingling with the sawdust in the air. He bagged the pieces in black plastic, tying each one tight, his breath steady, his mind a blank slate save for the task at hand. Hours passed, the night deepening outside until the job was done. A girl reduced to fragments, a life parceled out in garbage sacks. By dawn on February 25th, Stephen reached Ruskin, 30 miles south, the sedan rattling along backroads lined with scrub pine and marshland. The sky bled pink and orange over the horizon as he pulled up to a dumpster at 2893 14th Avenue Southeast, a rusted hulk squatting beside a strip of abandoned warehouses. He climbed out, the gravel crunching under his boots, and tossed the bags into the maw one by one, their thuds swallowed by the pile of refuse, rotting food, broken furniture, the detritus of lives discarded. He wiped his hands on his shirt, the fabric smearing with faint streaks of red, and climbed back into the sedan, driving off as the first rays of sun glinted off the dumpster's edge. It settled into silence, a grim monument to a girl erased, the morning breeze stirring the trash in a faint, mournful rustle. In Gulfport, the same day Miranda vanished from the duplex, her grandmother stood in the Gulfport police station, her frail hands wringing a tissue until it shredded between her fingers. The station hummed with the low buzz of fluorescent lights, the clack of keyboards, the murmur of officers swapping stories over stale coffee, a sterile contrast to the tremor in her voice. She didn't come home, she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, her gray hair escaping its bun in wisps. She's never done this. Not once. Officer Daniels leaned forward, a weary 40-something with sharp eyes shadowed by too many sleepless nights, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. His pen hovered over a notepad, its pages curling at the edges from the humidity. "We'll find her, ma'am," he said, his tone steady but tinged with the rote assurance of routine, a promise he'd made too many times. "Any idea where she might have gone? Friends? A boyfriend?" The grandmother shook her head, her voice dropping to a murmur, brittle with worry. "She was on that damn phone all the time, always texting, always hiding it. I should have checked, should've," she broke off, her hands trembling as Daniel scribbled a note, the seed of a lead dangling just beyond his grasp. The days that followed stretched thin with silence, the case a quiet ache in a town too small to lose someone so completely, its residents whispering over fences and in grocery aisles about the girl who'd slipped away. The thread unraveled on March 6th, when a jittery 20-something dialed the St. Petersburg police, his voice cracking over the line as he spilled to Detective Lisa Harper. "I saw this guy, Stephen, acting weird," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush, his breath hitching with nerves. "Kept talking about a girl, a dead girl. Bragging almost like it was a joke. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't sleep after." Harper, 30s and relentless, slammed her coffee mug onto her desk, the dark liquid sloshing over the rim and staining a stack of case files. Her office was a chaos of pinned photos, maps crisscrossed with red lines, and a whiteboard scrawled with names, a testament to a mind that never rested. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, her eyes burning with a fire that flickered between determination and exhaustion. She grabbed her partner, Jason Reed, a gruff 50-something with a smoker's rasp and a limp from an old bust gone wrong, his face weathered like the coast he'd patrolled for decades. "We've got a lead," she said, her voice tight with urgency, already pulling her jacket on. "St. Pete duplex. They found Stephen already caged in Pinellas County Jail, nabbed on March 5th for pointing a harpoon at Michelle in a drug-fueled spat, his mugshot a sneering mask of defiance framed by greasy hair." In the interrogation room, Harper leaned across the scratched metal table, her gaze drilling into him, her hands braced as if she could pry the truth from his skull. "Where's Miranda Corset?" she demanded, her words a blade honed by days of dead ends. Never heard of her, Stephen shot back, his smirk a taunt, his fingers drumming a restless beat on the table. Reed slid crime scene photos from the Largo home across the surface. Bloodstains on hardwood, a saw blade's glint, a rag soaked red, and the smirk faltered, a crack splintering his facade, his eyes darting to the images before he forced them back to Harper's. Michelle surrendered on March 8, walking into the station with her hands raised, her face a map of exhaustion and defeat. Her hair hung limp, her clothes reeking of stale smoke and sweat, and she met Harper's eyes with a hollow stare that carried the weight of guilt she couldn't voice. "It was him," she whispered as the cuffs clicked shut, her voice barely audible over the station's hum. "All him." Harper's reply was ice cold, her grip firm as she guided Michelle to a holding cell. "Save it for the judge." The investigation unfurled like a grim tapestry, threads pulling tight across 3 towns, each piece a brushstroke in a portrait of horror. At the Largo home, forensics swarmed the scene, their gloved hands bagging the saw, its teeth flecked with dried blood, the stained rags, the floorboards that whispered of dismemberment under the glare of portable lights. The air was thick with the scent of bleach and decay, the house's silence broken by the snap of cameras and the murmur of techs piecing together the timeline. In Ruskin, police cordoned off the dumpster, their flashlights slicing through the dawn as they sifted through trash, rotting garbage, shattered glass, the detritus of 1,000 lives, pulling traces of hair, a shred of fabric, a button that might have been hers. But the body had likely already churned into the landfill beyond, a vast expanse of waste that mocked their efforts. Harper stood at the site, the wind tugging at her jacket, her jaw clenched as she stared at the horizon, the sun climbing higher but offering no warmth. "Landfill's too big," Reed grunted, kicking at the gravel, his voice rough with the pragmatism of experience. "Then we keep looking," she snapped, her resolve a steel thread that wouldn't snap, though the weight of it pressed against her chest, a ache that grew with every hour the girl stayed lost. On March 21, Chief Anthony Holloway faced a sea of cameras outside St. Petersburg Police HQ, his stern face framed by Harper and Reed like sentinels carved from stone. The press conference buzzed with the hum of anticipation, flashes popping as reporters jostled for sound bites, their notepads filling with the story that had gripped the region. Holloway's uniform gleamed under the lights, his 50-something frame rigid with authority, his voice steady but heavy with the gravity of the words. "This was horrific," he said, pausing to let the weight settle over the crowd. "Stephen Gress and Michelle Brandes are in custody, charged with first-degree murder. We're still searching for Miranda's remains and we won't stop until we find her. Parents, watch your kids online. Talk to them, check their phones, know who they're talking to. This can't happen again." The plea hung in the air, a warning etched into the public's mind as the cameras whirred, capturing the moment for the evening news. Behind him, Harper's eyes burned with a fury she couldn't voice, her hands balled into fists at her sides, the case a stone lodged in her throat, justice within reach, but closure slipping through her fingers like sand. Reed stood beside her, his face impassive, though his limp seemed more pronounced, as if the weight of this one pressed harder than the rest. Weeks later, the Gulfport beach stretched quiet under a bruised sunset, the sky bleeding red into the Gulf of Mexico, the waves crashing with a relentless rhythm that drowned out the world. Miranda's grandmother stood alone at the water's edge, her frail figure dwarfed by the vastness of the sea, her gray hair whipping in the wind. She clutched a faded photo of Miranda, smiling in a schoolyard, her eyes bright with dreams that stretched beyond Gulfport's small borders, and her soft sobs mingled with the salt air, carried out to where the horizon swallowed the light. Her hands trembled, the photo creasing under her grip, a lifeline to a girl who'd slipped away in the night. The town behind her buzzed with whispers, neighbors who'd seen Miranda grow up, teachers who'd marked her absent, friends who'd texted her unanswered pleas, but here on the shore, it was just her and the void. The investigation lingered, an open wound in the system, Gress and Brandes awaiting trial in cells that couldn't erase what they'd done. Stephen sat in Pinellas County Jail, his smirk replaced by a sullen glare, while Michelle chain-smoked in her own cell, her hollow eyes fixed on the wall, replaying the moment she'd crossed the line. Miranda's remains, lost to the landfill's depths, left only echoes, a haunting refrain of a life snuffed out by a digital thread pulled too far, a girl lured from safety by a promise that turned to ash. Harper drove the coast that evening, her sedan cutting through the dusk, the case file strewn across the passenger seat, a silent passenger of their own. She traced every lead, interviewed every witness, stood in the rooms where Miranda had laughed and died, but the absence of a body gnawed at her, a failure she couldn't shake though the evidence was ironclad. The radio crackled with static, a news report recapping Holloway's words, and she switched it off, the silence louder than the noise. Reed had gone home to his wife and a bottle of bourbon, his gruff, good work, the closest he'd come to sentiment, but Harper couldn't rest. She pulled over near the beach, watching the grandmother from a distance, her silhouette a ghost against the waves. The case had cracked something in her, a woman who'd seen too much but never enough to stop caring, and she wondered, not for the first time, what drove her to chase shadows when the light always faded. The sun dipped below the horizon and the beach fell silent, a testament to a story unfinished, a girl unburied, and a justice that felt like grasping at the wind, noble, futile, and cold as the sea that stretched before her. The tragic case of Miranda Corset, a 16-year-old lured to her death through a social media app, raises unsettling questions about our world, our choices, and the systems we navigate. Here are some prompts to ponder, each digging into the layers of this haunting story. How much responsibility do social media platforms bear for Miranda's fate? Should there be stricter age verification or monitoring to prevent predators like Stephen Gress from exploiting vulnerable users? Or does the burden fall entirely on individuals and families? Miranda's grandmother didn't check her phone, missing the signs of danger. Where's the line between respecting a teenager's privacy and protecting them from harm? Could closer supervision have changed the outcome, or was Miranda's desire for escape inevitable? What drives someone like Stephen Gress to prey on a teenager he met online, and what pushed Michelle Brandes from bystander to accomplice? Were they products of their environment, poverty, addiction, desperation, or was there a deeper malice at play? Miranda's remains are lost to a landfill, leaving her grandmother and investigators without a body to bury or fully resolve. Does this lack of physical evidence diminish the justice served by convicting Gress and Brandes, or is their punishment enough to honor her memory? Chief Holloway urged parents to watch their kids online, but what about the broader failures? Law enforcement's delayed response, the ease of online predation, the isolation of small towns like Gulfport? How do we fix a system that only reacts after the tragedy? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. We'd love to hear your perspective on this chilling case and its echoes in our world. Now it's your turn. Drop your answers or reflections on these questions in the comment section below. Let's get a conversation going about Miranda's story and what it reveals. Don't forget to like this post if it got you thinking, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and turn on your notification bell so you never miss an update. Your voice matters. Join the discussion.